Erica, and for our midterm project, I decided to do one of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies. While there are many stories in this particular book that have become some of my favorites, none of them truly captured my heart like this one did. Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet was a find for me. I read it when I was 13, ironically roughly around Juliet's age. And for some reason, I guess the hopeless romantic side of me fell in love. Anyway, this story is marked as a romantic tragedy. But the tragedy doesn't lie within the suicides of Romeo and Juliet like so many people believe. These suicides would not have occurred if not for one simple thing, and that was a feud amongst the families. The Montagues and Capulets could not even be in the same room. Whenever they would see each other in the streets of Verona, they would not stop until the streets ran red with blood. They had even been warned by the prince himself that if they were to fight again, one of the families would be banished. Well, Romeo and Juliet meet, and there's a small flicker of hope from the friar. He says maybe if Romeo and Juliet wed, then the families will have no choice but to get along. Well, this isn't true. Instead, a fight breaks out between Mercutio and Romeo, and with Mercutio's death, Romeo is banished. So, this story, whether or not it was true love or not, doesn't mean anything. Instead, it all comes down to the fact that this was a tragedy because of the bloodshed due to this family fight. I had 3 sources to back up my theory. One of them was called Civilization and Its Discontents, and it explains how Juliet exhibited many of Freud's model of humanity factors. For instance, she longed for happiness despite the fact that society and her family would not agree to this. Her loving Romeo was against all the rules, but she did it despite everything else. There was also the idea of her being a rebellious teenager along with Romeo. Was it real love? Or was it just the idea that their parents couldn't get along that made the other so desirable? In Dallying with Death, it explains that there's a lot of humor in this story. I never saw it very humorous, but I did notice there was a lot of foreshadowing from this paper. For instance, unlike most stories, it simply says, death will come to hush us along at the beginning of the play. Rather than opening up with a silent or simple title and opening, it says death will come to hush us along, meaning that this story will not have a happy ending. It will more than likely result in the end of Romeo or Juliet's life, or possibly both. This is also seen during Mercutio's death scene whenever he cries out a plague on both your houses. This implies that both houses may very well suffer at the end of this tale. There is also what kind of play is Romeo and Juliet. This goes back to the discussion of the tragic young lovers. This story mainly gives the idea that instead of actually being in love, maybe it was just the idea of romantic love. Romantic love fades as this is simply the attraction between the two. But they may not have even been attracted to each other. It was more than likely the family feud. Who doesn't love the idea of a forbidden romance? Romeo and Juliet simply may have been attracted to each other not because of how they looked or what they felt, but because they knew their families would hate it. This is further demonstrated whenever it's entertained by the friar. While he is in disagreement at first with the family coming together and doing the wedding for Romeo and Juliet, he sees this as a way out. He sees a union between these two families through the wedding of their children as a way to finally stop the bloodshed between the Montagues and the Capulets. This falls through, however, when they decide that they will have to sneak off and do this marriage, rather than have their families be a part of it. As we all know, Juliet sends a letter saying what she will do. She will fake her own death and then she and Romeo will wed. Well, plans go astray whenever the letter is not delivered to Romeo. Instead, he arrives after killing Paris and sees Juliet dead. She has not wakened from her sleep yet, and so he drinks the poison and kills himself. Juliet, waking to see him dead, stabs herself with the dagger that Romeo had. So at the end of this tale, it's hard to decide whether or not this was true love or whether or not it was simply a romantic love that wasn't going to last. It would have eventually fallen apart, or it may have ended in happily ever after. Either way, this wasn't meant to be because of this family feud. This family feud that seemed never to end only ended after the bloodshed of two young lovers in the streets of Verona. Only then did peace finally ensue.